Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with the unseen wisdom. We're going to be looking at something pretty interesting today. It's been making headlines and sparking a lot of conversation. Um, and that's the South African passport.
Okay.
It's actually been climbing the ranks
Oh, wow.
on the Henley Passport Index. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I have actually.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's at its strongest point in over a decade, which is pretty exciting for South Africans, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the Henley Passport Index, that basically ranks all the passports in the world based on how many countries you can travel to without needing a visa.
Exactly.
So like a higher ranking on that list basically translates to more freedom of movement for citizens. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and it's a big deal for people. I mean, think about it. If you're South African, you can now visit 106 countries without even needing a visa.
Right.
That's huge,
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it's great that the number is increasing, but we have to kind of dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
What's driving this positive change? What's going on behind the scenes?
Yeah. I mean, a passport's strength, a lot of people don't really understand how it works, but it really reflects a country's overall well-being, you could say.
Right.
So things like economic stability, their relationships with other nations, like diplomatic relationships, and even just their reputation on the world stage in general.
Like how other countries view them.
Yeah, exactly. It all kind of plays into it. And we did actually find a statement from South Africa's Minister of Home Affairs talking about this. I don't know if you saw that.
I did, yeah.
Referred to the passport as the Green Mamba, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, kind of a cool nickname.
Yeah. It is. And you can see that there's a real sense of national pride attached to this whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a strong passport, I guess it shows that other countries respect you.
Exactly. It's like a symbol of a nation's standing in the global community. It can open doors to all sorts of things, tourism, investment, even cultural exchange. I mean, it has implications beyond just travel.
Yeah, but it's not all rosy. I mean, there are some concerns that have been voiced.
Oh, of course, yeah.
About this stronger passport.
Yeah.
One of the things that we saw was worry about people trying to get South African passports fraudulently.
Right. Makes sense. Especially, people who are trying to get around immigration controls might see this as an opportunity.
Right, because if it's a stronger passport, it's more desirable.
Exactly. And it really underlines the need for really strong security measures to protect the integrity of the passport system. We don't want people, misusing it.
Right. And we did see one specific case. I don't know if you remember reading this. There was a Zimbabwean woman who pretended to be a South African asylum seeker.
Oh, wow.
And she used that to get into Ireland.
See, that's exactly the kind of thing they're worried about.
Yeah.
And it shows you that the South African passport is actually desirable even outside of South Africa itself. And it raises some important questions about border security and the potential for exploitation, right? Because we want a stronger passport. That's great.
Right.
But we also need to make sure the system is being used correctly.
Yeah, for sure. We also saw some information about South Africa's policy of giving asylum to people from other African nations, and specifically people who are facing persecution because of their sexual orientation.
Right.
It seems like South Africa has kind of gotten this reputation for being really committed to human rights.
Yeah. And I mean, that's certainly reflective of South Africa's kind of progressive stance, on the African continent. But our sources also mention that there have been some instances where people have tried to take advantage of this system.
Yeah, by making up stories to get asylum.
Exactly.
It's a tough situation, isn't it?
Yeah.
On the one hand, you want to be welcoming and provide refuge for people who genuinely need it.
Right.
But then on the other hand, you have to protect the system.
Right.
And make sure it's not being abused. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah. It really is. And it leads to a bigger question, you know? What's causing this whole shift towards a stronger South African passport in the first place? What are the real factors at play here?
That's a great question. And that's actually what we're going to be looking at.
Okay.
As we continue our deep dive.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Stick around.
Yeah, don't go anywhere. So we really need to kind of go beyond just the numbers here. When we're looking at the reasons behind the South African passport getting stronger.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that we saw in the research was that South Africa has been giving visa-free access to people from different countries.
Yeah.
Even when those countries don't do the same for South Africans.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's kind of like they're taking the higher road, they're being very open.
Yeah.
It shows a real willingness to connect with the world.
Yeah.
Encourage travel and exchange. even if it means that they're not necessarily getting the same treatment in return.
Makes you wonder if that's part of the reason why some people are worried about the passport system being misused.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, it's great to be open and welcoming,
Right.
but you also have to think about security. You have to have a balance.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about the benefits for South Africans themselves.
Okay.
What does this stronger passport actually mean for them? Like in terms of traveling or working or studying abroad?
Well, this is where it gets really exciting for people
Yeah.
because suddenly they have all these new options. For example, now South Africans can travel to Russia without a visa.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine exploring Moscow and St. Petersburg, all that history and culture?
Yeah,
And you don't have to go through all the hassle of getting a visa.
that's amazing. What about tropical islands? You mentioned those before.
Oh, yeah, those are definitely more accessible now, too. There are a bunch of island nations that are welcoming South Africans without a visa.
Hmm.
So, think about all the possibilities for vacations and just relaxing and experiencing new cultures.
Yeah, it sounds amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not all about just vacations.
Right. Not at all.
A stronger passport can help with business and education too.
Absolutely. It can make it much easier to do business internationally. Go to conferences, study abroad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, imagine you're a South African entrepreneur and you want to do business in Russia.
Yeah.
Well, now it's so much easier to make that happen.
So it seems like this stronger passport could actually be good for the South African economy as a whole.
Yeah, I think so. It can attract foreign investment, encourage tourism, facilitate trade. It all kind of works together.
Yeah.
When you have a strong passport, it tells the world that you're a stable and trustworthy country.
Makes sense. But we have to talk about the potential downsides too.
Right.
Like, what about brain drain?
Yeah, that's a real concern. When you have a more powerful passport, it can sometimes lead to more people leaving the country.
Especially skilled professionals.
Exactly. They might see better opportunities or a better lifestyle somewhere else and decide to emigrate. It's a complicated issue.
Right.
Because on the one hand, you're losing talent and expertise.
Right.
But on the other hand, those people who leave, they can also build connections and networks abroad.
Yeah.
And that can actually benefit South Africa in the long run.
So it's about finding a way to balance the negatives with the positives.
Exactly. You want to minimize the negative impact of brain drain, but also take advantage of the benefits of having people connected globally.
So looking ahead, what do you think will affect the South African passport's strength in the future? Can they keep this going?
That's the million-dollar question.
Sure.
And it's something we need to explore further as we continue.
Okay, so we've talked about the good stuff and the not so good stuff that could come with a stronger South African passport. But I'm curious, what do you think the future holds? Can South Africa, keep this up? Are there things that could derail it?
Well, it's tough to say for sure, right? Because the world is always changing.
Right.
You could have some big global event, or the economy could tank. Even a health crisis like we saw a few years ago could throw things off.
So it's not just about things inside South Africa.
No, not at all. It's about the bigger picture.
Like stuff happening outside their control.
Yeah, exactly. And those external forces can have a huge impact. Imagine if South Africa got into a big diplomatic mess with another country, or if their economy really went downhill. That could definitely hurt their passport's ranking.
That makes sense. It's like their passport is a reflection of how the rest of the world sees them.
Oh.
Okay, so let's say South Africa wants to make sure this good momentum keeps going or even gets better. What can they do? What are some steps the government can take?
Well, one thing that's really important is to make sure the passport system is secure, like we were talking about before. Because now that the South African passport is more attractive, it's going to be a bigger target for fraud and misuse.
So they need to invest in some serious technology and make sure they're checking everything really carefully at the borders.
Yeah, exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where you're making it easy for legitimate travel, but also making it super hard for people to sneak in or fake passports.
Makes sense. What about that visa reciprocity thing we were talking about?
Oh.
Where South Africa lets people in without a visa, but those countries don't do the same for South Africans.
Right.
Could that be hurting them?
It's definitely something to think about. Maybe if they negotiated some better deals with other countries where it's a two-way street, that could help.
Yeah.
It would not only make the South African passport stronger, but it could also strengthen their relationships with other countries and maybe even boost the economy.
So it sounds like there's a lot of diplomacy involved here.
For sure. But it's not just about what the government does. Regular South Africans have a role to play, too.
Oh, that's interesting. What can they do?
Well, first of all, they got to protect their passports like it's gold.
Yeah.
Keep it safe. If it gets lost or stolen, report it right away. And be super careful about scams where people are trying to trick you into giving them your personal information.
So basically, be smart and careful.
Exactly. And when South Africans are traveling abroad, it's really important that they represent their country well. So that means following the laws of the country they're visiting, respecting the local customs, being polite and friendly.
So basically being a good ambassador for South Africa.
Exactly. Because every little thing you do when you're traveling reflects back on your country.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I think we've learned a lot today about the South African passport. We talked about why it's gotten stronger, what the benefits and challenges are, and even what the future might hold. What do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the main takeaway is that a strong passport is a really valuable thing.
Yeah.
It shows the world that your country is doing well. It opens up all kinds of opportunities, and it helps people connect with each other across borders. But it's not something you can just assume will always be there. It takes work, both from the government and from regular people, to make sure it stays strong.
That's a great point. Well, listeners, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the South African passport. We hope you learned something new, and we hope you'll think about what you can do to help keep the South African passport strong. Thanks for joining us on The Unseen Wisdom, and we'll see you next time.